If you've ever been invited to a Brazilian Sunday lunch, you know there are certain things you can almost count on. The table gets louder as the afternoon stretches on, someone insists you try just a little more, and the kitchen stays warm with that comforting, lived-in rhythm. And then, when the savory dishes finally slow down, there's a moment of quiet anticipation because one dessert shows up again and again, like a tradition you can taste: Brazilian pudim with caramel sauce. Today I'm taking you right into that moment. Not the fancy, reinvented version, the classic pudim that tastes like family gatherings, birthdays, and come eat before it's gone. And I'm going to explain each step in a way that makes the results make sense, because with pudim, the smallest choices create the biggest difference. A few degrees too hot, a rushed caramel, an overmixed custard, and the texture changes, the flavor shifts, the magic gets a little lost. Picture the first step: sugar in a pan, heat underneath, and patience above all. At first it looks dry and stubborn, like nothing is happening. Then the edges begin to melt, turning glossy, and suddenly the whole thing transforms pale gold to honey to a deep amber that smells almost toasted. That color matters, because it's the line between sweet and flat versus sweet with a gentle bitterness that makes you want another slice. And then comes the custard, the heart of the pudim: condensed milk measured with the can the way Brazilians do it at home, and eggs blended until smooth. Not foamy, not aggressive, just enough to bring everything together. Because when air gets trapped, heat turns it into those little holes some people grew up with, and others spend years trying to avoid. In a minute, I'll show you how baking in a water bath at 180 degrees Celsius keeps the pudim creamy and uniform, and why trying to speed things up almost always backfires. If this kind of Brazilian comfort dessert speaks to you, give the video a quick like so you don't lose it. And tell me, what's your biggest curiosity about Brazil? Now, let's start where pudim truly begins: the caramel. Before we even touch the custard, we start where every unforgettable pudim begins: the caramel. Picture a quiet kitchen on a Sunday, that late morning light coming in, and the sound of a spoon tapping a pan. I pour sugar into a saucepan and keep the heat steady, because the cause and effect here is immediate: rush it, and it burns. Baby it too much, and it crystallizes into a gritty mess. The sugar first looks like dry sand, then it melts at the edges, turning into a golden lake. I don't stir like I'm making soup, I gently swirl the pan so the heat stays even. That's how you get a deep amber color, glossy and slightly bitter in the best way, the kind of caramel that balances the sweetness instead of just adding more of it. When it reaches that just right shade, I move fast. Caramel waits for no one. I pour it into the pudim mold and tilt the pan so it coats the bottom and climbs a little up the sides. This thin layer is important. Later, when we unmold, it becomes that shiny crown that slides down the custard like a warm memory from family lunches. If you're enjoying these details, give the video a quick like, because the little steps are exactly what separate an okay pudim from the one people talk about. Now the custard: condensed milk goes into the blender first, then I use the empty can as my measuring tool for regular milk, because tradition isn't just romantic, it's practical. Then the eggs. And here's the point where many people accidentally create that eggy smell: they overbeat. Too much air equals bubbles, bubbles plus heat equals holes. So I blend only until smooth, creamy, unified, like pale silk. I pause and ask you, when you think of Brazilian food, what's the first dish that pops into your mind? And if you want more recipes with the why behind them, subscribe naturally now, because next we're going to talk about the water bath and the exact temperature that makes this pudim set like a dream instead of turning into a sponge. Now that the pan is wearing that glossy caramel coat, it's time for the custard, and this is where pudim goes from simple to silky depending on a few choices. In a blender, I add 1 can of sweetened condensed milk, then I use that same can to measure the milk, fill it once, pour it in, and you've got the classic Brazilian balance. Then come the eggs. Not just for flavor, but for structure, eggs are what turn this into a custard instead of a sweet milk soup. Here's the detail that changes everything: how you blend. If you run the blender too aggressively for too long, you whip in air. Air becomes bubbles, and bubbles become those little holes people argue about at Sunday lunch. Some families love the pudim com furinhos because it feels rustic and nostalgic. But if you want that smooth, polished slice that looks like it came from a bakery window, keep it gentle, just enough to combine. And after blending, I like to let it rest for a minute, so the foam rises and calms down. As I pour the mixture into the caramel-lined pan, you can almost feel the tradition in the motion. This is the dessert that waits patiently in the fridge while the house fills with Sunday sounds, cutlery, laughter, the last pot of coffee being made, someone asking if there's still rice. If this is bringing back a memory for you, tap like so I know you're in the Pudim club too. Now we set up the water bath, because heat is the real secret ingredient. The bain-marie cushions the custard, so it cooks slowly and evenly. Without it, the outside overcooks before the center sets, and you get curdled edges or extra holes. The oven goes to 180 degrees Celsius, steady and controlled, because higher heat is the fast lane to separation, the proteins tighten too quickly, the custard sweats, and the texture turns grainy. While it bakes, tell me something, what's your biggest curiosity about Brazil? Food, music, family traditions, anything. And if you want more Brazilian classics explained with these little cause and effect details, subscribe naturally, because in the next part we're going to talk timing, doneness, and the cooling step that makes unmolding feel like magic. Now the caramel is set like a thin amber mirror along the bottom and sides of the pan, and that's not just for beauty. This layer is your insurance policy. When the pudim chills, it's going to release with that glossy sauce already waiting. While the pan rests, we move to the custard, and this is where tradition in Brazil feels almost like a little ritual at the kitchen counter. I crack the eggs one by one, and I'm not rushing. If you whisk too aggressively, you whip in air, and air turns into those little bubbles that bake into holes. Some people grew up loving the pudim furadinho, but if you want that smooth, satin slice, the consequence of too much agitation is right there in the texture. Condensed milk goes in first, thick and sweet, then I fill the empty can with regular milk and pour it in. That can measure is classic Brazilian practicality, like someone's aunt taught you once and it just stuck. I blend just until everything becomes uniform, pale and glossy, then I pause and listen. The sound changes when it's ready, from slushy and uneven to silky. If you have time, letting it sit for a minute helps the foam settle, and that little patience shows up later when you cut into it. Custard into the caramel-lined pan, slow and steady. And now the most important part for texture, the water bath. I set the pan inside a larger tray, and pour hot water around it, halfway up the sides. This is gentle heat by design. At 180 degrees Celsius, the oven becomes a warm embrace instead of a harsh blast. Too hot, and the eggs tighten fast, squeezing out moisture, creating those tunnels and holes. Gentle heat, on the other hand, gives you a custard that trembles like it's breathing. As it bakes, the kitchen fills with that familiar smell, caramel with a whisper of vanilla-like sweetness from the condensed milk. If this is bringing back a Sunday table for you, go ahead and tap like, because that's exactly the feeling we're chasing. And tell me, in your family, was pudim the dessert that always showed up, or was it something else? Stay with me, because next I'll show you how to know it's done without over-baking, and the chilling step that makes unmolding almost effortless. Now that the custard is blended and resting smooth and pale, this is where pudim stops being just a recipe and starts becoming that Sunday lunch memory. You pour the mixture into the caramel-coated pan, and you can almost hear the kitchen in the background, someone opening the oven door, the clink of a spoon against a glass, quiet conversation turning into laughter. But here's the detail that changes everything, the water bath. If you bake the pudim with direct heat, the outside cooks too fast while the center struggles to catch up. The result is a custard that tightens, squeezes, and releases steam, those famous little holes. Some people actually love them because it feels more homemade, but if what you want is that dense, silky slice that melts on the tongue, the water bath is your best friend. So you set the pan inside a larger baking dish and add hot water around it. That water becomes a buffer, keeping the temperature gentle and even. At 180 degrees Celsius, the heat surrounds the pudim softly, like a warm blanket instead of a harsh spotlight. And because the custard cooks slowly, the proteins in the eggs set without panicking. That's the cause and consequence in real time, calm heat equals smooth texture. While it bakes, you resist the temptation to crank the oven higher to make it faster. Higher heat feels like a shortcut, but it's really just pressure, and pressure creates bubbles. The pudim doesn't need speed, it needs patience. You watch for subtle signs, the edges look set, the center still has a slight tremble, like it's breathing. That gentle wobble means it'll finish firming up as it cools, instead of overcooking and turning grainy. When it comes out, the aroma is quiet but unmistakable: milk, caramel, and that warm custard scent that feels like home. Let it cool, then refrigerate for hours, because chilling is what gives you clean slices and that classic, creamy bite. If this is bringing back memories or making you hungry right now, leave a like so I know you want more Brazilian classics. And tell me, what's your biggest curiosity about Brazil? In the next moment, we're going to unmold it together, and that caramel is going to flow exactly the way it does at a real Brazilian Sunday table. And now comes the moment that feels like a little ceremony in so many Brazilian homes. The pudim is cold, the kitchen is quieter, and you can almost hear that Sunday lunch table in the background, plates being stacked, someone asking if there's coffee, a laugh coming from the living room. I loosen the edges gently, taking my time, because this is where patience pays off. If you rush, you can tear the custard; if you respect it, it slides out like silk. I place the serving plate on top of the pan, hold them together like they're one piece, and flip. There's a brief pause, that tiny suspenseful second where you wonder if it will release cleanly. Then it happens, a soft, satisfying drop, and the pudim settles into the plate with that smooth dome, trembling just enough to look alive. And when I lift the pan, the caramel follows, flowing down the sides in slow ribbons, glossy and amber, pooling around the base like a sweet halo. This is why those small choices matter. The deep caramel gives you a bittersweet edge instead of pure sweetness, so each bite tastes more grown-up, more balanced. Blending the custard until smooth, without overworking it, helps you get that clean slice. And baking at 180 degrees Celsius in a water bath is the difference between creamy and spongy. When the temperature gets too high, the custard boils inside, traps steam, and those little holes appear. Some people love them, because it reminds them of childhood pudim. But if you want that classic, velvety Brazilian texture, gentle heat is your best friend. I cut a slice and the knife goes through with almost no resistance. The center is pale and glossy, the edge is set, and the caramel clings to every curve. It's simple food, but it carries memory. It's birthdays, visits, just because Sundays, and the kind of dessert that always makes room for itself, even after a big meal. If this brought you a little closer to Brazil, tap like so I know you want more recipes like this. And tell me in the comments, what's your biggest curiosity about Brazil? If you're enjoying this journey through Brazilian culture and flavors, subscribe and come back, because there's always another table, another story, and another sweet waiting for us.